Hey, everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today, bud?
Today, we're going to be chatting about Trump's 30-day pause on tariffs against Canada, how Chinese state-backed narco groups took control of Canada, Canada's role in North American drug trafficking, Poilievre's plan to dismantle internal trade barriers, allegations that Jagmeet Singh used his influence to cover up his father's medical scandals, and Dostoevsky's warning about why humans reject utopia. All right, let's get into it. So first off, we've got Trump pauses tariffs for 30 days after Trudeau pledges border crackdown. Facing U.S. tariffs, Canada launched a $1.3 billion border security plan to curb fentanyl trafficking, securing a 30-day reprieve from Trump's 25% tariffs. Trudeau's measures include appointing a fentanyl czar, expanding surveillance, and designating cartels as terrorist organizations. Trump framed the tariffs as a national security move, not economic leverage. Mexico secured a similar deal by deploying 10,000 troops. Markets reacted with volatility, but the short-term relief offers little certainty. The next month will reveal whether Trudeau's concessions prevented a trade war or simply postponed it. As Trump insists, security concerns dictate negotiations. So is Trump using tariffs as a negotiating tool or an economic policy?
Okay, so here's my whole take on this Trump situation. What I think is that his roadmap is quite clear. Most politicians in most countries are just not seeing it yet. Here's why. America's had a trade report that has been tabled in Congress every year since the 90s, since the Clinton administration. And on this list, what it does is it lists the irritants or the things that America would like from that country, but they're not willing to get via trade. So basically the trade blocks, like, okay, what are the issues we're having here? So every president has seen this list. They all know what it is. Now, you could go through every country. We'll just kind of focus on Canada. Our list has been very consistent for this entire 30 years. Now, I don't know how long they've had the list, but that's how long it's been being tabled in Congress for sure. So Americans do not like a few things that Canada does because we don't give them access to our market. They don't like our supply management agreement that limits our agriculture and food production. They don't like our Broadcast Act. They don't like our Telecom Act, and they don't like the protectionism in our banking sector. And what was interesting is you saw this the other day. Trudeau and Trump were kind of going at it, and he's like, okay, we're going to appoint the fentanyl czar. We're going to have more troops on the border. We're going to put $200 million into this program for a joint U.S. strike force. Okay, cool. A strike force always sounds super cool, right? It does. It always sounds fucking dope. I wish I was a part of a strike force. Anyway, but Trump also slipped something in. Let's talk about banking and telecom as well. He just slid in that note. Hey, Trudeau, we're going to talk about banking and telecom as well. So this is Trump's ultimate plan. He's going to go through this list. And what he's going to do is he's going to separate them into allies and enemies, for argument's sake, just call them enemies. And he's going to isolate the enemies with tariffs and other tools, I imagine. The Chinas, the Irans. This is what he's going to do. He will use force when he feels like it, apparently. And then what he's going to do to his allies, which is kind of interesting, he's going to pry open their protectionist policies with tariffs until they allow America into the economy so that they can access the trade things that they actually wanted in the first place. So what he's doing is he's reshaping global trade. So this is like a globalism 2.0, because you and I have talked about this idea where they're going to go more towards nationalism, domestic production. I still think that's true. But what he's going to do is he's not shutting everybody off. He wants access into their economy so that America can benefit. Because we've seen this over the years. America goes into a country and they leverage the resources, Guatemala, Bolivia, Cuba. You see these issues, right? And then all of a sudden, there's either nothing left or they get into basically a war and that country ends up siding with the East, let's call it for argument's sake, right? So what he's doing right now, it's interesting, is he's kind of doing the same thing, but he's doing it in a better way, like a better chess move, more diplomatically, because he is still going to get, I guarantee you, through his term, there will be Americans in our banking system. They'll be in our telecom. I guarantee that the supply management's either going to get cut off or cut in half, and they're going to be inside that as well, and involved in the broadcasting. I guarantee you that Trump's going to weasel his way in to everything in Canada that he wants, and then he'll pull the tariffs back. So it's interesting. If I'm thinking about it from a political perspective, you kind of lose either way, right? You let Americans into your. I mean, let's think about this. Our top 5 companies in Canada are banks, right? In America, not even close. So this is actually a problem for Canadians. And this is what I was going to get to, is for the consumer, this isn't actually that bad, right? Because you could argue you don't want it, and you could kick and scream and moan, but let's think about this objectively for a second. If we deregulate or we allow more competition in the market, what happens? Supply goes up, and then our prices get better. Supply management's bullshit. We both know that it's bullshit. We shouldn't have this. We also know if you let
Let's
more
just tell people what supply management is for a second. Essentially, the government puts quotas on production for agriculture within Canada in order to have control over the prices of agricultural products.
Yes.
So this is where you see videos of farmers, and whether they be dairy farmers or whatever, saying like, look at how much milk I'm pouring down the
classic
drains,
example.
because the government, the supply management aspect is they're saying you're only allowed to supply this much.
Right.
Anyways, continue.
No, that's good. I'm just about wrapped up anyway. My final point was going to be, this is exactly what I think he's going to do. I think he's kind of reshaping the global economy to suit America. I think he's sick of America being considered equal to these other countries that don't contribute as much. And with him sort of separating the enemies and the allies using these tools, this is also why he's pushing for a much larger contribution to NATO. Because he realizes he may be starting these wars. You may need more defensive power in the coming years because of these decisions he's making. Anyway, that's just potential. But just sort of to wrap up, back to the consumer perspective. If we have more options for banking, more options for telecom, we're paying the highest prices in the world, I think. If not, we're in the top 3 for sure. If we have more competition in our markets, Canadians as consumers will do much better. It will actually help us. So what's interesting is, if you think about it back to the political perspective, they're kind of losing either way. It's either tariffs or they let Americans into their economy, right? But for Canadians as constituents, the tariffs really, really hurt us, but the increased competition actually helps us. So the political will, like the will of the people, will be to let him in and do it. I don't know what the long-term ramifications look like, but this is what I think is really going on.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about it from that perspective. I think no matter what, Canadians will be very adverse to all of this, anything that Trump does, because so buried in the Canadian psyche is an anti-American elitism. We like to place ourselves on a higher moral standard. Like a lot of even it's a derogatory term that people use to describe, say, Canada's deep state, and I'll use it right now. The Laurentian elite, right? The powerful people that live in direct public policy in Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. And again, that's all the media outlets and all of that. They're very anti-America. So every move that Trump makes of pro-America, and however that comes into opposition with Canadian interests, they're going to heyday. You're going to just see mental meltdowns all throughout our political class. Just because of just hate for America. But I wanted to expand on, because you were talking about the chess pieces, and this is where I think people need to look at how this, because we are entering a new world order essentially, right? This was that fork in the road. Okay. Actually, about a year ago, I found this old clip that we did where we were talking about how the World Economic Forum at one point posited the fact that, okay, we have 3 things right now, which is globalism, so the interconnectedness between nations, democracy, so the peoples being represented by their governments, and we have sovereignty, so nations essentially being in control of themselves. And his whole point, saying him, Klaus Schwab, was that we're entering a world where we have to choose 2 of those. And essentially the World Economic Forum was choosing globalism and quote unquote democracy, right? And so they were going to erode sovereignty to all of these international organizations, World Economic Forum, UN,
post-nationalist, yes.
The Trump world is saying, we're doing away with globalism. We're going to have sovereignty and democracy.
Yes.
So much of the globalist world was predicated on the fact of American military protection in trade routes, in supply chains, and all of that kind of stuff. Like say, hey, the whole world can trade all of this because we're guarding the Red Sea. So don't worry about Hezbollah, because if they start fucking with the global supply chains, we'll step in.
Yes.
Trump's now saying, if you want us to provide that supply protection, like, you're going to have to pay us. And that's why he's going, all right, let us into your economies. We're going to screw you. If you want the American protection, give us complete.
This comes at a cost.
Yes. And so these tariffs, I see them as being one lever, because, we've made the analogy of entrepreneurs or even just people being able to pull certain levers when you need certain things. Okay, my population is starting to collapse. I'm going to pull the immigration lever and pull more people into the country, whatever. If Trump wants something, he's going to look at it and just go, well, I can just start threatening the tariffs. The only issue is, and this is why I think tariffs will come inevitably, is because he knows he can't just continue to bluff and threat. At a certain point, you have to put action behind it.
Yes.
If you don't want that threat to wear off. And so this is where I think in regards to the tariffs, one of the things that I do completely agree with, he's going to use them to pry in economic influence as well. But I do think he does genuinely care about the cartel and drug trafficking stuff as well.
Sure.
And so that is a thing. And so what I think you're going to see is Trump threatens tariffs. Trudeau says, okay, we'll spend $1.3 billion more. We'll do more soldiers down to the border. We'll do helicopters surveilling it. Great. As soon as he starts implementing that and gets complacent, Trump's going to, I think, implement the tariffs for 2 weeks, a month, or something of that nature to stimulate more, going, that wasn't enough, do more. And then Trudeau's, or whoever's in power, Carney at that time, is going to have to react and go, okay, yeah, we'll put more. And then Trump will ease off the tariffs. And then 6 months down the line, he might so I think it's going to be a constant. It's not like, oh, for 4 years, we're going to enact a tariff policy. And
No.
It's
you don't get access.
He's going to be constantly
They're
leveraging
definitely tools of leverage, 100%. It's just a matter of what he's trying to leverage and how much he can leverage and how many times he can continue to use the same tool.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's I think what we're trying to decipher here really is like, A, like, what's the primary reason, and B, sort of what are the benefits for America. And I think it's what I'm seeing is there's several reasons. I don't disagree with you. Like the immigration issue needs to be buttoned up. It's not good for Canada either, right? Like this is definitely something we need to curb. So that kind of motivation is not even necessarily bad for anybody, and you did a piece on the drug trade, which we'll talk about later. So like you look at the issues, you kind of go, okay, like he's not wrong. We do need to fix these things. It's not really great to do it under threat because of the economic effects of something like that. But when I do look at, so the guy that's basically running his economic policy is a guy named Peter Navarro. He was in his last administration. He's the one who's sort of spearheading this whole thing. And this is kind of his brainchild a little bit. And this is why, like, there are receipts on what I'm saying. This is the strategy they have. Mm-hmm. But I also think that, you can use a baseball bat for a lot of things. Sometimes hitting a baseball, sometimes hitting somebody, right? Yeah. So these tariffs, they can be used for a number of things. And I think what he's doing is I think he's trying to leverage as much as he can by using this, because people are like, oh, Canadians are confused. I forget which American said this, maybe Rubio, whoever it was. Canadians are seeing this as economic warfare. They're just misunderstanding. No, we're not. That's what this is.
Yeah,
you use these weapons on all the other countries you don't like, and now you're using them against Canada. That's exactly what this is.
As a nation, you have on a geopolitical front, you have two main levers. You have a bunch of levers within them that you can pull, but it's either economic or military.
That's exactly it. Exactly. So for me, it's kind of nonsense that he says that, but I think we're both right. And I think it's a matter of him seeing how much juice he can squeeze out of this, really. And then we'll go from there. And one thing I would just want to clear up is I was saying, hey, it'll be beneficial for Canadians if American companies come here. I understand that some people might lose jobs. I don't think it'll all be rosy, but ultimately with more competition in the market, we will pay lower prices. And that is the biggest problem Canadians have right now.
Yeah. And actually, the one thing that I just want to analyze a little bit further within this whole discussion is Trump being a businessman. This is why you see bureaucrats, because I was talking about, the Laurentian elite losing their minds every time Trump does something, and or all over the world, you see this, is because these people that have that bureaucratic mind, they're very rigid, solidified people. They want to have, and we see this all throughout time, people that are state forward focused, not business or commercial minded.
Yes.
And so put more faith in the public sector to get things done than the private. They think a lot of the times in their mind, no matter the ideology really is, there's one way the world works, and therefore we just need to implement a system and it will work forever the way we want it to. This is where we just need a 5-year plan or whatever that bureaucrats do all the time. And this is why they can't deal with Trump. And this is why I really don't like the ruling class Canada has right now, is because they're all very rigid and think that way. But the Trump aspect is going like, all right, I'm going to stir some shit up. I'm going to position myself differently in there. It's chaotic in nature. It's very it's fluid more than it is rigid.
Yes.
And so he's constantly just going, all right, I'm going to put you on your back feet for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And people we know this, bureaucracy is extremely slow. And so they're not used to somebody being like, oh, we're on a 2-week basis right now, not a 5-year, 10-year plan.
Yeah.
Fuck your 5-year, 10-year plans.
Bureaucrats don't do stick and move.
Yeah.
They just don't do it. It's a silly analogy, but it actually fits, is because I don't really want to give him that much credit, but it's like he's playing chess while our government's playing checkers.
Right.
That's what it is.
100%. Yeah. So I think that's why we need more or better leadership immediately. All right, second story of the day, we've got why Trump is attacking Canada and how China took over. Canada has become a global hub for money laundering, with Chinese and cartel-backed networks exploiting lax enforcement. The Vancouver model enables wealthy Chinese elites to bypass Beijing's capital controls by handing money to the triads in China. In return, they receive untraceable cash in Vancouver, which is then funneled through casinos, converted into clean Canadian dollars, and often parked in real estate, inflating housing prices. This system, long ignored by Canada's ruling elite, has deepened corruption and strengthened diplomatic ties with Beijing. Liberal governments from Jean Chrétien to Justin Trudeau have dismissed U.S. concerns over foreign infiltration, prioritizing Chinese investment and influence. With politicians entangled in these networks, meaningful reform remains unlikely, leaving Canada-U.S. relations strained as Trump pushes for accountability. So I see this very much as this. China has a lot of influence both on the crime front and diplomatic front in Canada right now.
Yes.
In America, Trump is going, hey, Canada, I know that China's been your daddy for the last 3 decades. We're turning this around. We're the big dog on the block now. And so I guess, will the current Liberal government, do you think they'll prioritize their ties to China or America in this?
So here's what I think will happen. They'll definitely prioritize America, but the variable is how involved is China? And if it's enough, how much will they be involved in the decisions here? So what I mean by that is this. If China is deeply embedded in our politics as much as we think that they might be, and organized crime and the CBSA and the list goes on, if they are if they're deeply entrenched in there and they're using this as one of their primary hubs, they go, okay, we can't beat America as Canada. We can't help Canada beat America. That's gonna fuck everything up here, because we have been kind of operating under the pretense that it's not real. Canada's still a sovereign state. China's not that deeply embedded. That's how this has been operating optically, right? So China can't come out and say, nope, we're the daddy. Let's go. Let's dance. Right. So they realize this, but they go, okay, but there's still a lot of benefits to being in Canada. We still have a massive infrastructure there. We still control their politics in a way. Okay, their borders. Yes. Okay, so Trump's causing a lot of noise right now. He's causing a ruckus. How do we reorganize our control over Canada to maintain control, but to appease Trump? And that's actually what I think might happen. I think China may be, and this is obviously, it's a wild guess, but I think that they may be deeply enough entrenched that they go, okay, we're just going to reposition ourselves within Canada, and we're going to go, yeah, we're choosing you, America. We're going to help Canada kind of make that decision, optically look to America like, yes, we're behind you 100%, America, but we're still going to be deeply in there. We're just going to do a better job. We're going to be more covert, because here's the thing. How long is Trump in office for? 4 years. How long is Pierre Poilievre going to be in office? Maybe 10. But let's call it 5 from now. Let's just say that. So China's already going, we're going to have to shake things up anyway, because there's new leadership coming in, and they're going to push back against us because the Liberal government, they left the door a little too wide open anyway. So I think they're already thinking about how to manage this. Now they just got to speed it up a little.
A very interesting, I think, point you just kind of made there was the distinction between how America and China push foreign nations. So to your point about how in the West, we've got these 4-year cycles, right? And so a lot switches up in that time. We're seeing that right now. The strategy of Trump in America, American interests on a geopolitical scale is completely different than the Democrats.
Yes.
China is not in a similar scenario. they've had the exact same party ruling the country since 1950, the Chinese Communist Party. They all operate on the same ideology. Nobody steps out of line. The party line is truth, is the rule. Nobody deviates.
Dark.
100%. But so they can play long deception games.
Oh, yes. That's a huge advantage.
And these are where they go.
Talk about chess and checkers. Huge advantage.
Right. So they can go, okay, yeah, we're going to implement a 30-year infiltration plan into Canada. Like, that's going to take a very long time for us to get the amount of influence we want in that nation. But then Trump in America, on the other hand, is from a strength in force power play point of view, and they go, I got to get this done now.
Yes.
And so that's where you're seeing these, it's the difference between, let's say I want to, if you've got a room of people and you're saying, I want these people to follow me in a certain way, you can do it two ways. You can walk into the room and say, anybody that steps out of line is going to get punched. And so I say what goes now. Or you can get in there and you can manipulate everybody to the point where you're just kind of puppeting the strings in the social fabric.
Yes.
It just takes longer.
Yes. This is the advantage of China. I say this like, I have no appreciation, like Trudeau has said he does. But if you think about this strategically, if you think just in terms of warfare, they have a major advantage.
Right.
Because if they've got a person in every one of their corporations, like literally down the hall, not like, they'll call in once in a while, they're there for all the significant corporations in China. They get to use their entire economic system as a chessboard against the world that
right.
I'm going to continue using this, that are playing checkers, because they do rotate government so quickly. And they have all these different economic ideas and policies, and everybody just kind of wants to make their mark. That's why I like transit moves so slowly here in Ontario. It's just bullshit, right? So in the cities, rather, like Mississauga has been such a joke, like in Toronto as well. Anyway, so China has this advantage, but it's also, like you said, that's just the economic side. They also, because they've been in power, the same government's been in power for 80 years, 75 years, whatever it is, they get to play this game that we just have no access to. It's just, it's such a massive advantage. And I just don't think that there's any way right now that the West can actually, quote unquote, beat China, because they'll just wait us out. That's what they'll do. No matter what, they'll just wait it out.
That being said, and I mean, Trump is waging war against it right now, so it'll be interesting to see how this affects geopolitics. But if you look back at over the last decades of America, this is the whole concept of the deep state, what we're talking about in terms of how China can operate.
Yes.
That's how America's deep state, quote unquote, would operate, which is, again, there's this machine that no matter who is president, or even if president starts trying to step out of line, like a JFK, who was very similar to Trump in the sense where he said he was wanting the CIA to stop pulling strings of like, why are we toppling governments in Africa? Why are we overthrowing governments in Europe?
Why are we trying to start a war in Cuba?
JFK was very much on that mentality. And Cuba was what soured him, right? Because the CIA told him, hey, this is going on in Cuba, and that's why we need to go in, and we've got this plan, and it'll execute flawlessly, the Bay of Pigs. And
such a debacle.
And then it ended up just falling apart. And then that's when Kennedy realized, oh, my own team is lying to me right now.
Yes.
And so, but that's that deep state, which operates like China.
Yes. Well, the thing is, like, hate to say this, but you can't bring a sword to a gunfight. Mm-hmm. That's the truth. So I don't agree with the deep state. I don't agree with the things that they do. I don't agree with a lot of it. But if you're just thinking from a macro perspective, if China has that set of tools, how do you fight them if you don't have a set that are similar? How do you join this gunfight? So like, it's weird. I'm not really making a case to justify the deep state, but if you think about it from a macro perspective, non-emotionally, it makes sense, because how else can you compete with them? Mm-hmm. Very difficult, right? Because like I said, they'll just wait you out. Now, one thing Trump could do that's interesting that might actually give them an advantage, or it might put them at bay for, could be decades, if he draws a hard enough line between the East and the West through tariffs and through other economic policies, and maybe even through war, he may be able to push China mostly out of a lot of places in the West. He may be able to, and to the point that they have to be so covert about it that it doesn't really affect us in quite the same way. It just depends how far he's willing to go, right? Because if he ends up waging I don't think he's necessarily going to do this, but if you end up seeing like a full-fledged East versus West war, and these lines get drawn very firmly, then they'll be out for a little while. Then, kind of the Western democracy can do its thing without a lot of that infiltration. It'll still be there. But that's the only way I see that Trump through this administration could have a significant effect on China.
Right. And yeah, to build on your point about, not saying whether certain things are right or wrong, not trying to get into a what ought to be conversation, but just keeping it on like a what is I feel like you and I are very similar in that aspect where, okay, even I oppose China, especially ideologically, on almost every foundation.
Yes.
Like, I think the Chinese Communist Party is one of the most evil entities on the planet. I think communism in general is
100%
exactly equivalent, if not worse, to Nazism, because, when we were talking about the whole strength versus deception aspect, communists operate with strength. The Nazis are in-your-face bullies, and that's why it's a lot easier to deal with the bullies because they're in your face and you see that it's happening to you. You can be like, I understand this person's fucking with me.
Just tell me to fuck off so I know I have to punch you in the face.
But this is why I find communists so much more disturbing and scary, is because you don't like the way that they come in and infiltrate you is just completely different. You don't even see it coming, to the point where now I'm sitting here going like, and I dig through history and I'm like, oh my God, where we are today is been a 40-year plan. Like, how do you, and then you start thinking about solutions to it and you go, oh, this is so much harder because you've got your essentially tentacles around me so deep.
The hooks are in deep,
and so it's so much harder to deal with.
Yes, exactly. That's why that's basically the perspective that I have of, I don't think we can beat them.
Right.
So we'll see how it goes, man.
But what I was going to say is, from a what is not moralizing about China or whatever, is if you just look at even say Xi Jinping, when you understand how these power games work, because think about geopolitics like Game of Thrones. Every house is constantly making alliances with one another to overthrow somebody else. Within those houses, people are constantly vying for power.
Yes.
Like, in this world of geopolitics and power in general, like, somebody is always trying to cut your head off. And so if you are a Xi Jinping, and again, I'm not a fan of what he has done, but it's nonetheless impressive that somebody like him is able to sit in that top position and not have his head taken off for 20, 30 years, however long he's been in there.
Yeah.
I think actually it's probably closer to 15. I think
you're right. Yeah.
But either way, it's still nonetheless, even though I'm not like, oh, I like this, it's impressive.
Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Like, I don't want to go too far into Putin, but if you can run Russia for that long and stay in power, like, you can dislike it all you want, but it's still impressive.
Right.
It is. It just is.
And I just want to bring it down to a little bit more of a ground level, because we did go very geopolitical there, but I do want to dive into exactly how China is in Canada, because in bring out that Vancouver model a little bit more, just so that it really sinks in how this works. So Canada is essentially if you think about the international drug trade, what I'm coming to realize is, yes, Canada does play a large role in the production and the trafficking of drugs, which we'll get into right after this. But Canada, the main thing Canada is a money laundering hub. It's the financial zone of the drug cartels.
Which is interesting because of how aggressive our tax system is. It feels like, why would anybody wash money here? But I guess it's dirty money.
Well, and I think it's probably because China's so in deep, they've got so much in the institutions that they can pull the.
You know what I mean? No, like it seems like it would be almost. I hate to say that, but it's almost like it'd be cost prohibitive to wash your money in this country. But I guess obviously they find their way around these things.
Yeah. So this is how the scheme works. Is so, businessman. Again, if say the CCP says you can't, this is what the number is you can't take more than $50,000 out of the country at a time or per year or something of that nature. But let's say you're a billionaire and you want to get $10 million out of the country. What they will do is they'll go to the triads in China and say, hey, I'm going to give you my money in China. And then, yes, they fly to Vancouver. And that's where the triads in the drug trade in Canada take their dirty money and give it to the businessman from China. And so that's how the drug cartels clean their money, because they go, I'm giving you this dirty cash and I'm getting your clean money back home. And then the business guy goes into the casino, changes that dirty cash for chips, plays a few hands, goes, puts it into Canadian banking, whatever he's got set up, and then they use that cash to buy real estate, and now they have a physical store for their liquid cash in Canada. So that can't be touched by the CCP.
Right. Okay. And then two things that are very important there is you don't get taxed on your gambling winnings in Canada.
Right.
So you don't lose any money like you do in the States there. And number two is once you purchase real estate in Canada, there's basically a closed door behind the economics. No one's allowed to find out where the money came from. So it's like we have this system that allows them to use those two things as conduits to clean the money legally. It's insane.
Yeah, that's what blew my mind when a friend of mine that worked in the housing development sector, he was saying that they've got a few high roller clients that will come in and buy houses with cash. Yeah. And he's just like, we don't have to tell anybody. It's like, what? That's crazy. And I'm not somebody that my initial thought
I don't like regulation. Don't get me wrong.
My initial thought there isn't saying, okay, now we need to immediately regulate that and give the government more power over that. But my mind goes to, why the fuck when I'm doing my taxes am I getting grilled by the CRA? And this is the shit that's going on in this country, and they're coming down my throat for an extra $2,000, $3,000 or something. And you're like, everybody pays priorities.
The bill. Yeah, everybody pays the tab. It's just the Chinese pay it to the government, via the back door, and you pay it in the front door.
Right.
That's all.
To put into perspective, the amount of money laundering that is going on in Canada. So again, the Vancouver model is something that's known internationally. It's not just within Canada. There's a great article that I used for the basis of that video I did earlier this week on this topic, but it was by a financial crime institution. So when they're teaching people that want to get into criminal finance in schools, they use this model of Vancouver as like the case point. Be like, okay, this is how money laundering works. And so like Canada is the case study for money laundering. But in 2018, an estimated $46.7 billion was laundered in Canada.
That's a few bucks.
Our accommodation and food services, so our hospitality industry is worth $47.1 billion. Wow. So money laundering in Canada is basically as big of an industry as our entire hospitality sector.
I feel like I'm in the wrong business.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, one of those sectors is growing and one of them is declining.
Okay, I am in the wrong business.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next story. Canada's role in drug trafficking is bigger than the media will admit. Canada's political class downplays its role in the fentanyl crisis, claiming drug seizures at the US-Canada border are minimal. In reality, these drugs aren't caught at the border because inspections are weak. Less than 5% of cargo is screened. Instead, the real busts happen deep in the US, where Canadian truckers, many trained through Ontario's unregulated trucking schools, are caught smuggling massive drug shipments. In Indiana, 273 pounds of cocaine was seized, which would have been 6% of all drugs intercepted at the Canada-US border that year. In Illinois, 2 men were caught with 1,146 pounds of cocaine worth $40 million.
How high do you think those guys were? No, but that's so much cocaine.
In Montana, Gurpal Singh Gill smuggled 211 pounds of cocaine hidden among bananas. In California, Sam Nang Bu ran a smuggling ring moving 450 kilograms of meth and 333 kilograms of cocaine.
Okay, that guy was really, that's top shelf shit.
So just keep those right. So I only just listed 3 examples of different, they weren't connected. These happened at different times, but 3 examples of drug smugglers, and we've got being caught, and that's roughly 3,000 pounds of drugs.
Yes.
In 3 instances. Like how much movement?
How much
is
did
not
you not
being
catch? Yeah, because
right.
You got to kind of run this game like, oh, we catch 10%, let's say.
Right.
Okay.
So this isn't an isolated issue. It's systemic. Ontario lowered trucking school regulations in 2019, allowing a surge of international students and foreign workers into the industry with little scrutiny. Today, 280 schools operate with minimal oversight. To put that into perspective, the number was 80 in 2017.
Oh, wow.
Funneling thousands into long-haul trucking. With so few border inspections, these drivers move drugs seamlessly across the U.S., exposing a government-created national security failure. So how does it make you feel as a Canadian to see your country hollowed out by organized crime?
You know what? Honestly, I'm somewhat indifferent. And it's not because I condone the crime, but because this is all due to bad governance at the very least, but most likely corrupt governance.
Mm-hmm.
That's how these things happen. Like, organized crime is a part of the system. There's really no way to remove it, right? Like, if you think you can remove it altogether, that's because your government's now running the ultimate organized crime ring. But even then, look at the triads in China. So there's no way to weed this all out. But what upsets me is that it's our weak-willed, corrupt leadership that led Canada to this point. So whether it's Ontario trucking laws, weak borders, rampant immigration, or the bullshit organizations running this place, organized crime scales based on these flaws that were all put in place by very flawed political leaders. So if you fix the system, you reduce the crime. So I don't like it, but I can't blame the criminals as much as I can blame the institutions that have basically put us at this point.
Yeah, and I'm not an idealist, so I don't think we'll ever live in a perfect world. But to me, so I think there will always be organized crime. You know, you look back to even say, and a lot of people say will go on the anti-immigration front on this aspect. And I do think immigration contributes to crime 100%.
It's statistically 100% accurate.
Especially when it's rampant like this and going unchecked. But you look at, okay, where was mass immigration coming from in post-World War II? You saw places like Italy, and that's where you saw the Italian mob. So it's not necessarily a racial thing as much as it is just when you take in, let's say, I mean, it seems so simple. It's so simple logic. But if I am going to take if our country doesn't have a lot of crime and I'm going to take more population from any country, no matter what country it is that has a lot of crime, I can expect that crime is also going to find its way into Canada.
Yes.
Whether it's from Italy, whether it's from India, whether it's from China, it's just, you're going to bring all aspects with you.
Yes.
And, but it goes so deep down in Canada. So this is from a report by the Social and Strategic Studies Journal. So they say it's all about Khalistan. So we've covered this before. So Khalistan was a separatist movement in India that seeks to establish a Sikh independent state in India. And so they've been involved in terrorist actions in the 80s and 90s. Like thousands of people died. They hijacked a flight. Like it was crazy stuff was going on in India. Anyways, this group has infiltrated Canada, much like the Chinese triads. But in this paper, so they say, in the economic and political spheres, Canada was most hospitable to the Khalistani extremists. Almost non-existent money laundering regime and the political system of nominations and leadership contests open to manipulation by organized groups with deep pockets offered haven to Sikh secessionists. So what have we seen in recent elections, right? This has kind of come into the purview is, wait, people that aren't even citizens of Canada can vote in party leadership groups. So that's what they're pointing to here, is that Canada was a target for that aspect of, oh, they don't do much good money laundering protocols, or in their political system is highly manipulable.
Right. And this is back to this weak-willed, corrupt governance and all this nonsense and these policies they allow in that put us in this position.
100%. And so, going back to the paper, they decided to penetrate the elected ranks of all parties, but NDP, New Democratic Party, and the Liberals offered best opportunities. Like many armed struggle groups, the Sikh secessionists split into two groups. One wing advocated parliamentary legal ways, while several others adopted terroristic methods. So what you're seeing here is above board. Okay, we're going to be diplomats just like in China.
Yes.
So this isn't just an India thing. Just like in China, we've got the United Front to try to work for our interests on above board with the politicians and all of this.
Yes.
And then we've got the triad groups in that has crime influence the underground of society,
Yes,
essentially.
you need both.
Yeah.
If you're gonna try to infiltrate a country, you need both.
Right. And so it says a similar strategy like the IRA, Irish Republican Army Division in 1969 into the official and provisional wing as well. So the World Sikh Organization, founded in 1984, self-appointed itself as the official wing. So if you've got the Khalistanis, which are the crime and drug trafficking aspect of it, you've got them, and then there's the World Sikh Organization, which is the political front for these interests.
Right.
But then it goes on to talk about all the stuff like how Sikh terrorists blew up Air Canada flight with 329 Canadians on board, and so that was back in the 80s, I think, was when that hijacking occurred. But nonetheless, this is just another example of how these groups and criminal organizations just take over our country. And so when I was talking about the trucking, drug trafficking busts, where you see these people getting busted with 1,000 pounds of cocaine, for instance, I'll just say this. You notice a pattern of a lot of Singh, the last name Singh, in these, which is a very prominent name in Sikh community.
It's a Smith from America.
And right. So it's so crazy. This is actually how it works. So again, it's not just an India thing. We're getting fucked in Canada about 10 different ways. But so you've got the Mexican cartel, which acts as the muscle. You've got the Chinese narco groups, which, I mean, they're all doing drug dealing and stuff as well. But like, as far as specialization, the Mexican cartel is the muscle. The Chinese they've got the money laundering operations, and they're actually in the institutions.
Yes.
And then you've got the Khalistanis, which seem to be the foot soldiers.
They do distribution. And what's interesting is both the Chinese and the Mexicans are also supplying product.
This is so crazy.
That's wild, man. This place is so fucked.
Yeah.
Man.
Oh, like,
humor has to be your default emotion, dude. Just give her a laugh.
Well,
oh my God.
I think, and this is like humor and curiosity, because again, I hate that this is happening, but I can't help but find it extremely interesting as well.
100%. I totally agree. It is interesting. Like, anytime you back into these sorts of things, you reverse engineer your situation. And this is why I kind of immediately pointed to the politicians and policy, and it's our infrastructure that's allowed this, is because there's two things you want to know. First, how did this happen? And second, if you're solutions oriented like you and I, how do you stop it from happening again?
Right.
So it's like that's why it's sort of interesting. But what I find, on sort of a different level is just how crazy, how out of whack it actually is. Because here's the thing. You and I are two idiots sitting at a table talking on a podcast, right? That's what we are. So this has gotten so out of hand that you and I are the ones talking about this, which means the government's known about this for decades. They've allowed all this stuff to happen. They've known this for such a long time. Like, this is a revelation that you've made when we kind of piece this together. Oh, this group's doing this and this is doing that. They know all this.
Oh, yeah.
And they still refuse to do anything. In fact, they condone it and they make money off of it.
Actually, I think a lot of it is actually the title of Sam Cooper's book, because he's been instrumental, especially in regards to the China and money laundering aspect of this whole puzzle piece and crime going on in Canada. But I think his title is very appropriate. It's willful blindness. It's like, I'm not even, actually, this was, we saw this. Trudeau, when Trudeau at one point was getting grilled in that foreign interference thing, he just admitted, he's like, oh, I don't read those reports. And then you've also got, actually, Sam Cooper wrote an article.
He's a unique idiot, though.
Right. But even Sam Cooper wrote about how back in the 90s, when American and Canadian intelligence agencies were warning the Liberal government that the Vancouver ports were being used as so essentially what happens is these groups will ship the raw products, like the raw chemicals and stuff.
The precursors from China for the fentanyl, yes.
And then they assemble it in Canada. And so,
yeah, they do the same in Mexico. Yeah.
So intelligence agencies were warning the Chrétien government about the port infiltration. Chrétien was the one that disbanded the port police in Vancouver.
So that's not willful blindness. That's
right.
Active. That is
true.
That is you not only condoning it, but you're supporting it, you're promoting it, you're enabling it.
Yeah.
Effectively, right? So that to me is part of the and you can look at a lot of things. and you can say willful blindness. And I think in a lot of cases, if you're talking about your regular MP that's just kind of in it for the paycheck, 100%. Absolutely. But when you look at Trudeau and look what he's done to our immigration, look what he's done to our economy, look at how he's let China into these elections and knew about it. So that's not willful blindness. That is, let's go. You're my support network. Great.
True.
So they're supporting it. So this is like, I think both things are happening. But for me, it is, when I think about it from that higher, that macro perspective, I just go, these assholes have known for decades and they're just fucking us all over.
Yeah, actually, so one thing in that, just, it was a big scandal, Randy Bosno, about 6 months ago, right? A lot of it got wrapped up in how he was lying about his Indigenous heritage, but the real story that flew under the radar there was how his business partner, because he was a part owner of the company Global Health Imports, or GHI, with a fellow named Stephen Anderson. And Stephen Anderson had ties to organized crime and drug traffickers. And that firm that they owned together, I believe it was GHI, but either way, whether it was GHI or another business, a business that both Anderson and Randy Bosno, the Liberal MP and former cabinet minister, shared an address with Francesca LeBlond.
Yes.
Who was caught with 460 pounds of cocaine on a private jet in the Dominican.
She also likes to party.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's a lot of drugs, man.
So you've got an MP's business sharing an address with these people. So you look at it and you go, oh, I'm supposed to believe that the Liberal government or, any of these people are going to wage war and crack down on the crime issue when it looks to me like there's zero difference. It's the Orwell
right in bed with them.
It's the Orwell Animal Farm thing when it's like they looked from pig to man and man to pig and they couldn't tell the difference.
Yes, that's exactly it. So, yeah, so this is why the only way through this is the ultimate purge of probably a lot of our politicians, a lot of our regulatory bodies, a lot of our institutions. Very, very Bukele style strategy here. Put them all in a room, be like, you're all under investigation. Let's see how this goes. Otherwise, it's just going to continue, unfortunately.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got internal trade barriers are costing Canada $200 billion. Poilievre wants to end them. As Canada faces a potential trade war with the U.S., Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is pushing to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers to strengthen the domestic economy. He argues that Canada makes it harder to trade between provinces than with foreign nations, costing the economy billions. A study estimates removing these barriers could boost GDP by $200 billion annually. Poilievre's plan includes overhauling internal trade agreements, incentivizing deregulation with a free trade bonus, and introducing a national blue steel licensing system for professionals so that doctors from each province can go and work in other provinces and such. While the idea has broad support, bureaucratic inertia and regulatory complexities may hinder its implementation. So why has it taken so long for Canada to even acknowledge its internal trade system is a nightmare?
Well, I actually think that it's been acknowledged for decades, but I think that the problem you have is you have the federal government fighting the provincial government on this because the provincial leaders are more worried about their own bottom line than how things play out for Canada as a whole. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is I'll touch a little bit on the history of this, but I do like what Poilievre is trying to do because this has really got to be a provincial decision, right? You got to get, or at least they have to comply. But I like that he's bringing a lot to the table. Hey, if you do this, here's what I will do for you, right? So I think that is a better approach than what we've seen in the past so far.
Carrots, not sticks.
Exactly, right? Because you do need them to comply and you do need them to sort of be on the same page as you. Now, a lot of these provincial trade issues, barriers, they came in like late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was after World War II, there was a major uptick in them again, because provinces now wanted to safeguard their own resources and make more money. So you were trading, back then, you were trading more with your own provinces like they were other countries. So you could sort of see why this happened, but it was interesting. So in the 50s, in the 60s, and in the 70s, there was all these agreements that were kind of floating around. They didn't have a lot of teeth in them to try to knock these down or get rid of them. And they were like, no, we're not going to do it. So they just didn't make any progress, but the conversation's been happening. And then finally, I think it was in 1995, they passed something called the Agreement on Internal Trade. However, it was also fundamentally flawed, right? Because it relied on voluntary compliance and it had far too many exemptions. So again, it was kind of bullshit, a little bit of nonsense, right? But then in 2017, the AIT was replaced with the Canada Free Trade Agreement. So this is actually a step in the right direction. You can give Trudeau a little bit of credit for this, but it still leaves rooms for trade barriers. So this is kind of where we stand. But here's the problem with this. The way that I would look at this is think about it like a standoff. Each province is holding a gun to each other's head.
Right.
Who's going to put the gun down first? Because if you pull yours and they don't pull theirs, it's economic disaster. So everybody has to all at once put their weapons down, and then I think we'll be okay. But what's interesting about this and why we may finally see this come to fruition is, back to something you and I talk about, which is the region beta paradox. So if something's bad, you won't make a change, but if it's bad enough, you will actually do it. So the current economic crisis might actually be bad enough that everyone goes, okay, let's put our guns down and let's find our way through this. So we'll see how it goes.
So I just wanted to pull up a video instead of responding. I mean, that was great. I do think that was a good analysis. But instead of responding, I just in this, I'd pull up this video, and it goes a little bit broader just into Canada's economy in general, rather than just interprovincial trade barriers. But it's very interesting. So this video is by Peter Zeihan, who is a geopolitical strategist and consultant for America.
Is this the guy that was on Rogan?
Yes.
This guy scares the shit out of me.
Yeah. He's the one that I started being able to call 2 years ago or so. Once I started reading his work, I was like, oh yeah, the end of globalization is 100% coming.
Yes.
And that's why
he's very confident. And everything he says is accurate. He's just,
well, I think factually his things are very accurate. And I do have a lot of respect for his understanding of geopolitical systems. And he's one of those guys that you name any country on the planet, he can tell you what their top exports are and this and that. And like how they're, I will say this. I think he gets paid by the American government consulting fees a little bit too much to ever step on their toes. So what I've noticed is every single projection he has for 10 years, 15 years down the line is America will be great and we'll be in a perfect position, and all these other nations, it's China that's going to collapse. And he poses very good information to back up his points, but everything he says comes with a very
that's a good point. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. Like, he's not really willing to be completely objective about America, but all the other countries he is. So it's like you can sort of take America with a grain of salt. The rest of it's been pretty accurate.
Or it's actually what I'd say is this is the what is versus what ought to be. So it's like his what is, when he's analyzing problems, are very good in his data of, hey, this is what has got us to this point. This is what's going on in this country is very good. It's the what ought to be or the what's going to happen that I tend to disagree with him on.
Yeah, that's the shit that scares me.
But this is him discussing 10 years ago Canada's economic situation. And there's a point where he doesn't say it, but it's funny to see 10 years ago, he floated the idea of Canada as the 51st state. And it is 4 minutes, so we'll let it run. But it's a fantastic analysis that I think Canadians should hear.
All right, most of our GDP that's involved in trade is locked up in 2 countries, so let's spend the rest of the time looking at our neighbors here. Now, let's start with the Canadians. Canada has a very big shale problem. They don't have any of their oil. They've got some of their own. They're not tapping. It's too expensive for them. But all of our shale energy is produced east of the Rockies and west of the Appalachians in the interior of the country. This has made a glut of oil and natural gas in the United States. There's about a $10 to $20 difference between a barrel of crude in the US and in the wider market. Now, all of Alberta's pipelines that send their oil and natural gas to the United States terminate in this area. So they are selling into the most supersaturated market on the planet. Supply and demand. On average, Albertan crude is at a $20 discount. Sometimes it's as much as $40. So they're getting at least a 30% knockoff of the international market. You guys remember Keystone, right? The prime reason that the Canadians want Keystone is if they can run this pipeline through this region and hook into supply chains in the interior of the United States, then their heavy crude can mix with the shale crude. And the $2 trillion of refurbishments that are going on in the US refining market don't have to be as expensive, because you won't have to retool, just do the light sweet stuff. You can do a mix. If Keystone doesn't happen, this pipeline doesn't happen, then the United States shifts entirely to light sweet in the interior, and Canadian crude has no home. It has no other way to get to the outside world. They've talked about a pipeline across BC, and BC's response has been going, Anyway.
He just signaled, giving the middle finger.
Ottawa's position on this is to Alberta is like, you still have more oil than the rest of the provinces put together, so keep producing, suck it up, do it for the country, pay your taxes. Remember this, right? Here's Alberta.
So what he's showing is the population distribution between Canada in general and then
Alberta is as young and highly skilled and highly paid as the rest of Canada is old and poorly skilled and poorly paid. And it's diverging. Right now, this is the only province in the country that has reproduction rates above replacement. The position on Ottawa, oh, you got young people, consumers, that's great. Tax the hell out of them. Do it for the country. Then there's Quebec. You guys all remember, I love the Quebecois, great food. Quebec moved towards independence several times, and as a result, the leaders of Ontario, the biggest province, sat down with the leaders of Quebec and they worked out a deal where Ontario pays Quebec to be part of Canada. There hasn't been a secession vote since. Well, that was great when Ontario could pay for it. Now they can't because they're aging into mass retirement. The position of Ottawa is, well, we've got Alberta to pay for it now. So 4 million Albertans are now paying for 35 million Canadians and 8 million Quebecois. The net tax bill right now is about $6,000 per man, woman, and child.
I just want to point out that that's what he's discussing there is the equalization payments that we were talking about last week, which is that Canada wants to nationally have the same public services, whether it be education and medical, that kind of stuff. They want to have the same level of it across the nation. So they take more money from Alberta and they subsidize other provinces like Quebec so they can offer similar services. And that's what he's discussing here.
$6,000 that they pay and they don't get back. That's over twice the disparity between the poorest and the richest American states. By 2020, that number will be 20,000 ahead. So the Albertans have some things to think about. One, watch their energy industry die, deal with a currency that's getting stronger and stronger, and just see the economic boom melt under them. Option 2, declare independence.
So he's saying that Alberta could become the Prairie Kuwait, essentially an independent nation that has nothing to offer other than oil and gas.
Courtesy of the Quebecois, this is legal in Canada. The Supreme Court even ruled on it. This doesn't really solve the problems then, because you're still a foreign country. Keystone can't happen, and wow, if you thought BC was giving you the finger before, imagine what it's going to be like now. Option 3.
So option 3, he's saying, is for Alberta to become the 51st state.
I'm not saying that this is going to happen. What I'm saying is that every economic, financial, diplomatic, energy, inflationary, and labor problem that Alberta has would be solved by this solution. And it's legal.
But you don't really need a secessionist party when you've got Danielle Smith, who's basically telling everybody in Canada what to do.
Right.
In terms of, not that she's got the control, but she's got her head on straight, right? She's essentially another Pierre Poilievre. And she's sticking it to Trudeau. So a secessionist party isn't really necessary, I think, when you've got a leader that handles herself like that. Like, I think if you had a hard left, if you had a Trudeau running Alberta, I think that that movement would be alive and well, but you don't, right? You've got very much I don't know what you'd call it, like a provincialist view, you know, from Danielle Smith being like, no, don't leverage us like this. No, you can't use us like this. She's fighting back against all these sort of equalization payment things. She's pushing to make sure there's no caps on oil or gas or anything like that. She's doing all the right things anyway. So it's sort of like, I think what she's up to right now is best for the province. So you go through a secessionist thing like that, you have to consider, right? Like, you need your own currency. You're going to have major trade issues. Everybody in the country it's going to make your life challenging. If you're on the coast, I think it's easier for sure. But I think they'd be in a tough spot. Like, I almost think without immediately aligning with the United States, they would be in a very, very tricky position. And I don't think things are that bad right now in Alberta, especially compared to the rest of Canada. I will say definitely, relatively speaking, they're not bad. When you look at the rest of Canada, things are going well there. So I think, you know, despite the mess that Trudeau and the Liberals have put us in, from a national perspective, I think it's about as good as it could be there right now. So I can understand maybe why there's not a lot of momentum behind it.
Well, that's what Peterson's whole argument has been about And actually, he wrote an article in the National Post. I think we touched on it in a prior episode. But his whole point was when you're looking at, say, the whole 51st state conversation, whether it be Alberta or Canada as a whole, like, what is Ottawa and the rest of Canada offering Alberta? Because, again, as soon as you get out of the idea of, say, Canada needs to remain exactly how it is, and I'm not making a claim that Alberta should or shouldn't do that or whatever. I'm not trying to say what should happen, but just objectively looking at the pieces at play here. When you look at things like the equalization payments, you go, okay, Alberta's oil and gas industry, which is the engine of its economy. Obviously, it has other things a little here and there, but the oil is the main thing. You're using Alberta's oil sector to subsidize the socialization of other provinces. And then you're turning around, especially in regards to the Liberal Party, and you see Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault put a 30% emissions cap on the gas and oil sector. You go, okay, that's a 30% reduction in my economy. So you're saying on one hand, I need to subsidize the country, and I also need to shrink my economy.
It's insane.
And
it's insane.
This is that old it's the Frederick Hayek quote where he said, if socialists understood economics, they wouldn't be socialists.
Yes.
And it's because they genuinely see it as like being able to plug a power bar into itself and get electricity.
What do you mean it's not working?
What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, what do you mean I can't decimate that economy and still
use it to subsidize the rest of the country? What are you talking about?
And so that was Peterson's argument, is being like, all right, hey, that's great. I grew up in Alberta. I wouldn't want to see it leave Canada. I have nostalgia for Canada and appreciation for Canada as a nation. But like, just on the ground, logically, what are you offering them?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think there's a great answer to that question. I think that seceding is a messy process and would be fought dramatically. Everybody in Canada would have to fight it too, because like realistically, like you said, they're the golden goose. So there'd be a big pushback against it. I don't think they would actually succeed in accomplishing that, to be honest with you. So I do think we should be doing more to at least help them. What's the word I'm looking for? To at least help them maximize the opportunity they can provide for themselves and for Canada. And I don't think we should be putting so much pressure on them. And I just don't. It's just like, you know, you're asking too much. You're asking too much. And all the policy we're putting in place is just making their life more difficult. It's just bad liberal policy. Honestly, man, it's just bad liberal policy. Anyway.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Jagmeet Singh allegedly used his influence to erase his father's medical scandals. Investigative journalist Mocha Bazurgan has uncovered that Jagmeet Singh's father, Dr. Jagtaran Jak Singh Dhaliwal, Jesus, this is a tough one, had his history of medical license suspensions erased from Ontario's College of Physicians and Surgeons, or CPSO, database. Despite multiple competency concerns and at least 2 suspensions, all records of disciplinary actions were removed in 2013. Bazurgan's findings suggest Singh himself used political influence to help reinstate his father's license, despite admitting in his book that Dhaliwal was an alcoholic during these suspensions. Meanwhile, the U.S. still lists 5 board actions against him, raising questions about corruption and regulatory favoritism in Ontario's medical system. So, is this yet another case of rules for thee, but not for me?
This is much worse than that, right? I mean, if he had his license reinstated to take out library books, I wouldn't even care. But we're talking about medical practice where the Hippocratic Oath is first do no harm.
Right.
This is insane, right? Using his influence to save his dad's reputation is right away, that's ridiculous, because this is all about ego and this is just kind of nonsense. But he's doing it at the expense of the health and well-being of Canadians. So I would suggest this is somewhat criminal, right? That's kind of where I would land.
I agree. And two, if you think about it, you're like, okay, it's not only that, okay, I got your license reinstated. It's that what Mocha described here is that he had the history of it erased from the database as well. So if I am a patient, I should be able to know if my doctor had been suspended before.
Is an alcoholic and has been in trouble for malpractice. Yeah, no shit.
Right. And so that's a really big issue.
This is wild.
And to put I mean, I don't think any of our listeners would think that Singh has anything that could be described as honorable about him. But, it's also worth noting when we were talking about all the Khalistani stuff and the drug trafficking and that kind of thing, Singh is directly involved with that Khalistani group. He's spoken at Khalistani rallies. He's on video on like a panel of a Khalistani that was giving the speech. So he's deeply intertwined with these people. I think he also has some overlap. I'd have to get fact checked on this, but I think he also has some overlap with the World Sikh Organization, so the diplomatic arm of the Khalistanis.
This makes sense, obviously.
And then you just put this all into a bundle, whether it's the ties with Khalistan or him getting his father reinstated and also those records hidden. Yeah, to me, I look at this and go, like, how are these people not behind bars? And that's why I think I'm getting more and more to the place where I don't even care about thinking about solutions. I know we've both tended to be in the past, be like, what would our policy be? Or what would be a good policy? It's like, even if I came up with the perfect policy, even if I had the chance to talk to one of these people and pitch it to them, like, we're talking about these are criminals. These are people that deserve to be behind bars.
This is why I think the only way to get this done is to, you and I were talking about this today at the gym. I do still consider jumping into politics. Like, I have a lot of things I want to accomplish first. And so I'm going to focus on those. That's A. If I check box A, then I might consider checking box B, which is politics. Because I don't see how else you get in there and actually change this, right? Because you consider this, what should happen to this guy? He should be stripped of his title and thrown in jail. That's it. That's actually it. And it should be like a minimum 10 years, take all the stuff. This is what it is. You and I do actually have the right policy here. This is the only way it gets done. This is the only way it gets done. And the problem is, Canada currently won't accept a leader. I don't want a Donald Trump here. I think Donald Trump's the right guy for the job down there. He's not the right guy for here. We're playing a very different game. His behavior and his attitude and the way that he plays would not play well in Canada because we don't have the same leverage and resources for him to do that here. It wouldn't work. However, having a version of something like him, someone that understood the landscape and would leverage our tools appropriately to implement these things. This is what I'm talking about. This is why when I say I get into politics, I wouldn't definitely not mirror Trump, but I would try to leverage our system most effectively. And these are the kinds of things you need to root out. But you need someone that comes in here with that kind of political will to come in there and fight this stuff, because everybody a part of the system only benefits from these things. Him and his dad benefit. We all sit here and go, wow, what an asshole. He should be in jail. We can do nothing about it. And they won't put those rules in place because him and all his friends continue to benefit. So he knows he can get away with it. You need someone to come in with that kind of strength and that kind of also autonomy, because they're not tied into some sort of corporate interest, to be able to come in here and be like, nope, you know what we're going to do? Cool, I can't catch him. I got it. This is already done and these rules are already in place. But if anybody else does it, like I said, 10 years in jail, take all your shit.
I agree. And you know what? I was thinking about that conversation we had afterwards, and because I originally said I have no interest in it. I wouldn't want to run ever for elected office or be a politician in that front, but
you'd be in my cabinet.
Well, let's say, or even if it was like, let's say this podcast continues to grow. My whole goal
you could be my Mark Carney. I'm just saying.
No, I would like my whole goal, and this is actually why we were talking about, or when we were even earlier in this episode, mentioning about why are we the ones talking about this? You and I shouldn't be the ones that have to focus on this, because in a non-clown world, our leaders would be worried about these issues.
You and I should be building businesses at our age. We should be out there thriving and having fun and just trying to build a life for our families. That's what we should be doing. Instead, we have to do this shit.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I think the reason that we do well in this zone of figuring out what's going on in Canada is because I approach everything, every topic, and more, I fall into some traps here and there a little bit, like anybody. But overarchingly, I try to position myself, just be like, what is going on here? What is happening? Not whereas a lot of these other people, and especially once you're playing that elected office politics game, it's not what's going on. It's how do I leverage this scenario to my benefit? That's the game. So you have to enter it in a different way. It can't be anymore, what's really happening here. It's how do I impose something on this scenario so that I benefit? And so it's different, but all this to say, if I was to ever get into this, it would have to be like an Elon Musk role type thing where it's like, hey, we're just going to bring you in here to be like, what's happening with the corruption? Because that's one thing. Give me that job. Give me the corruption investigation job of being able to be like, all right, investigate this person for this kind of shit.
Well, it's like what Sam Cooper said. He'd shut down the border. He'd shut down the bureau if they make him the border czar. Basically, right. He's like, yeah, cool. Give me this job and I'll gut this place and fix it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get it. I understand your position. Yeah, it's interesting. We'll see how it all shakes out. But for me, like, I just don't see any other way to fix these problems, unfortunately, because this is bullshit. It's such nonsense.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if that was your doctor and you find this stuff out now?
Oh, man.
It's just horrifying.
Well,
man.
Exactly. And this is why do you think people are losing trust in our institutions? It's because our institutions don't function for their purposes anymore. The medical institutions don't function for the primary purpose of medicine. Everything is politics. And
everything's compromised.
And that's actually very interesting to note about, and this is what I'm saying, is I think people are waking up to the fact that over the last decade in the Western world, a totalitarian machine was being built. We talked about the concept of turnkey totalitarianism before, where you get all of these things in place, like censorship, like economic control, and then you can just turn on the machine.
Yes.
What I think we're in the process of right now, and this has changed over the last 6 months, is now people are just aware that, okay, yes, this was, these institutions aren't working for my benefit. Nothing is. But that's actually one of the defining factors about totalitarianism as well, is that everything in society becomes a tool of political power. It's no longer like, oh, there's the political realm and then everything else operates outside of that. It's everything is politics.
Yes, the system is incredibly broken. It's basically, it needs to fall, but we live in a society, we live in a time and an era where they don't fall the same way anymore.
Right.
So you have to find a way to fix it, which is interesting, which is what I think Trump is really trying to do in the States, and we'll see how things go. You know, he's very bull in a China shop right now. But you know, these things don't fall and rebuild because we're not a third world country. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll see how things shake out with him and your Pierre Poilievre, and we'll see what kind of improvements he can make. But I still think a lot of this stuff is going to exist until someone does get in there with this very renegade attitude to be like, no, we're fixing this once and for all. And then just hopefully things don't get repealed, quickly. That's all.
All right, last story for the day. We've got Dostoevsky's warning, why humans rebel against utopia. Fyodor Dostoevsky was a Russian novelist who was born in 1821 and died in 1881, known for his deep psychological and philosophical explorations. Notes from Underground, published in 1864, follows an unnamed narrator, the Underground Man, a bitter, self-isolated former civil servant who rejects rationalism and utopian ideals. The novel is a foundation work of existentialism, questioning free will and human nature. So just to kind of fill in the audience here, Jonathan and I thought we'd start putting in one topic at the end of episodes that is a little bit outside of the realms of just straight news or politics or whatever, and kind of more so just focus on large scale concepts or whatever. But so this is an excerpt from the book that I think is extremely deep, and we'll get into a conversation about it afterwards. So and so you say, once the right economic system is in place, perfectly calculated down to the last detail, all problems will disappear instantly. Every question will already have its answer. Society will finally reach its pinnacle, its grand utopia, what some might call the Crystal Palace. But then what? What happens after we've achieved this perfect system? What if, instead of being fulfilled, we all find ourselves unbearably bored? Because let's be honest, if everything is planned and predictable, what's there left for us to do? Of course, people come up with all sorts of ways to fight boredom, sometimes even self-destructive ones. But maybe that won't even be seen as a problem. Maybe people will embrace it. After all, humans are incredibly foolish. No, not foolish exactly, just ungrateful beyond belief. I wouldn't be surprised if, in the middle of this so-called rational paradise, some defiant soul stood up, crossed his arms, and declared, "Gentlemen, let's smash this whole thing to bits, just for the thrill of it. Let's throw all of these careful calculations into the fire and live however we damn well please." And the worst part, people would actually follow him, because that's just human nature. Not because of any grand ideology or deeper reason, but simply because people don't want to be controlled, even by logic itself. People don't always act in their own best interest, and sometimes they deliberately go against it just to prove they can. This is what the so-called wise men never understand. They assume that humans crave order, virtue, and rational self-interest. But what if that's not true? What if the only thing people really want is the freedom to want to choose, no matter how irrational, self-destructive, or chaotic that choice may be? What if that unpredictable, reckless desire is the most important thing of all, the one thing that no system can ever contain? And so essentially what he's arguing here is this was back, again, in the 1800s, before the Soviet Union, and this was when socialist ideas really started coming into place, where, well, what if we just control every aspect of society, every plan, and this is what we see kind of has been unfolding, again, that turnkey totalitarianism, this socialist idea that's been taking over the Western world. And Dostoevsky's whole point is, look, even if you could achieve it, I think in the face of it, we would sabotage it for ourselves just so that we have, yes, as he says, something to do.
Yeah, I mean, I very much so agree. I think that humans rebel for a few reasons. One is, it's interesting. I have a take that humans are creatures of progress. So I'm going to take sort of the high road here. I've used this example before. If you look at a beehive from 10 years ago and you look at a beehive today, it's the exact same thing. It's magnificent, but it doesn't change. But if you look at a cell phone from 10 years ago versus today, the computing power and the tools that it has are significantly different. We progress. This is what we do. So if you were in a utopia and there were no problems to solve, progress inevitably slows. And with that, I think a natural human instinct. So I think that you would lose a big part of what even got us here if you had a utopia and everything was great. So I think from a high road perspective, that we would rebel for that reason. But the other one would really is like, which is sort of an extension of number one, is I think humans need to evolve beyond our sort of emotional weaknesses, primarily our ego. And this has got a lot of tentacles, this sort of concept or idea. But I don't think that we actually have the tools or the components to reach this sort of level of self-actualization. I don't think the humans that we are, there's been several different types of sort of humanoids. I don't think that we've got the set of tools we need to actually reach a level of self-actualization where we could drop the ego as a society as a whole, and actually just live in a utopia peacefully. And it's because I think that we're so different, and we have these base instincts that I don't think we could ever root out. And it's because you're going to have someone that's taller and better looking and more athletic and more intelligent than you. These people always exist, funnier, whatever it is, and you want what you don't have. And the thing is, people, so on both sides, you want what you don't have, and the people that are high performers want to live in a meritocracy where they get what they deserve. So these things, a utopia can exist in the same realm as these things, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And I will be forever grateful for the existentialists because that was definitely a school of thought within philosophy that I dove deep down into. Nietzsche would also be an existentialist. But one of the things in this is such a great worldview to have is because you do see so many people that want to get rid of problems in the world. They want a problem-free world. That's exactly what these socialists push for. Is we don't want any, everybody's got to be inclusive and divert, whatever. All of this DEI stuff. That's one side of it. They also want to get rid of economic disparities. That's got to go away. All of this. We got to solve these problems, right? And I think there's a different and better way to look at the world, which is instead of we all need to band together to solve the problems, it's that each individual needs to craft themselves into somebody that's capable of dealing with problems.
Yes.
It's not that I don't want problems in my life. It's that I want to be more capable when they come my way.
That's exactly it.
And it's a completely different perspective to have.
Yes. And it's interesting. So if you kind of look back over the last few generations, our grandparents or our great-grandparents, they were very versatile individuals. They were industrious. They would be able to fix their cars if they have them. They could knit, sew their clothes, patch them up, make their food, chop their firewood. They could survive. They had a lot of skills to help them stay alive because they were versatile individuals. So they'd solve problems every day that were a level 4, level 5, or level 6. and their stress management would be in the same level 4, level 5, level 6. What we've done over the last couple of generations is we've reduced this. So we don't have a lot of versatility anymore. We don't have a lot of problem solving skills like we used to. You look at the generation today and you like, your versatility out of 10 is a 1 or a 2, and your aversion to it is insane. Like everything just stresses you and you have anxiety over everything. That wasn't even an option 80, 100 years ago. And so society's actually kind of going in the wrong direction to be able to provide for themselves the way that you're saying. But I think that's what does separate people like you and I at times, is because we have worked through a lot of these problems. We have worked through things. I can eat stress sandwiches all day.
Mm-hmm.
If someone lived a life in my shoes over the last 5 years, oh my fucking God. And the thing is, I won't get too deep into it, but like I built a lot of businesses over the years, and through COVID, the ones that I put all the time into, I got absolutely ransacked. Like I was in the restaurant business, and a lot of people know this, but I went from and I came from a great middle-class family, but it was, work hard and get ahead on your own. So we did that. My wife and I sacrificed everything to get ahead, which a lot of people would disagree with. Okay, you need more balance in your life. Great, cool. But it worked. It actually worked. We did get ahead. And then COVID happened and they shut us down for over 500 days in the restaurant industry and it pretty much lost everything and have to rebuild. So if you look at how that shakes out for people, most individuals are not really prepared to handle those types of situations. And I'm not trying to pump my own tires, not even a little bit. That's not my intention here. All I'm saying is I've learned to become more versatile and I've learned to deal with stress and I've learned to take responsibility for my life. I've learned to deal with my problems, but that's how you learn. That's how you get. So my point is this: you have to put yourself in these challenging situations. I laugh about it now. I never even lost one night of sleep. Not even one, swear to God. Didn't even get me down. I didn't get depressed. I didn't freak out. Nope, I'm fine. Just keep going. I'm not a victim. Just keep moving. So because I put myself in those situations, now I've got the capability to solve my own problems. So I don't have jealousy. I don't have envy. I don't want someone else's life. I don't sit there with regret. I don't. When I made decisions at the time that I made them, I used all the tools that I had to make the right decision at the time. Sometimes it didn't work out, but I know that that's who I am. So I'm never hard on myself. And so I go through life, as that second person you describe now, but it took me a long time to sharpen those tools. And the disservice we're doing for kids these days is we're not putting them in any tough situations so they don't get to develop these skills. Then they have to go out into the real world and it eats them alive. And that's why we have such a mental health problem.
That's a really good point. And I think that actually really does underpin the whole existentialist philosophy as well, because with Nietzsche being one of the famous ones in this same sentiment echoes Dostoevsky's work as well, which is that Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why can bear any how." Meaning, if you have purpose, if you have a drive, if there's actually something that you believe in, and meaning is more than just a belief, I guess, but something that actually genuinely pushes you forward, then you can deal with those obstacles and those hardships as they come up. There's a reason for them. There's also another perspective that I think when it comes to, say, obstacles or hardships that is extremely beneficial to have, which is, okay, humans fundamentally want status. We want to move ourselves up in the social hierarchy. You can do that in different ways. You can do it economically. You can become a priest, and your community might be like, "Oh, he's so priestly," whatever, as long as you don't touch kids.
He's so priestly.
But whatever, people want to move up that social status hierarchy. Well, one of the main ways that we get status across the board, whether it be in business, whether it be in sports, is humans in general, love seeing somebody take an aim and hit the target. That's what they want. And actually, it's funny, the original word sin, its roots in Greek mean to miss the mark. It was a term for missing the mark while you were shooting an arrow. So sin literally means to miss the mark. So virtue or goodness would be to hit the target. And so you can think about obstacles this way too, as you go, okay, if I have a higher target, if my target is harder to hit than everyone else's, I'll get more status for hitting it. But then also, if my target's harder to hit, but there's also more obstacles in the way of me doing that, you can even think about it. They do this within archery and all this kind of stuff all the time. It's like, okay, your target's through trees now. Now there's all these obstacles. It makes it more impressive when you hit that target. And so if you have more obstacles in your way and you're trying to hit a harder target, people will award you more social status for it.
But you also have to become a better person to be able to accomplish your goal.
For sure.
And I think that's the other big thing too. It's like, when you do set these targets in your life and you do want to become, like I say this, it's such a corny thing, but like if you want to be great, greatness is something you choose every day. You do, literally. You get up and you decide how great you want to be. You can go be the best version of yourself or you can not. And it's the same thing. Like you can go challenge yourself with these things like shooting through the trees, because that comes with a set of obstacles that will, a byproduct of that is you will become great. So it's an interesting perspective. I totally agree.
All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 5 days a week and completely free. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.